Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ryan Spillers, Program Coordinator at the Alliance for Innovation. I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, a session I and the team at the Alliance are very excited to present, Ensuring Your City is in the Green Purchasing, that is. Today's webinar is being brought to you by representatives from Arizona State University, City of Phoenix, and our team here at the Alliance. In the next hour, you will hear why green purchasing is important for government procurement, as well as an overview of 8 real-world recommendations for city officials to buy environmentally friendly products. Now, before I turn it over to our panelists and jump into the content, let me first remind you all about the Alliance and, well, how to use your GoToWebinar control panel. As a premier resource for leading and emerging practices in local government, the Alliance board and staff pride ourselves on being accessible and valuable to all levels of an organization. Ultimately, it is our mission to grow and inspire a community of innovators to advance our communities and organizations. We do this by convening and engaging through leaders in the profession with our partners, ICMA and ASU. We identify, research, and share leading and emerging practices, and provide training to help organizations build and sustain a culture of innovation. We appreciate your engagement with us today to help us fulfill this part of our mission. All right, now let's look at your GoToWebinar options for just a moment. Looking at arrow number 1, you can show or hide your control panel at the top of the toolbox with the small arrow. You can also put your screen in full screen mode using the rectangle in the upper right of the toolbox. Now, arrow 2 points out that all attendees are muted during the webinar. We do this to ensure everyone can hear the presenters, but we do encourage your participation and ask that you submit your questions throughout the webinar. For arrow number 3, highlights the questions box, where you can type your questions out for the panelists throughout the webinar. To do so, click on the plus sign next to questions and type out your question. Once you've typed in your question, do make sure to click send, and we'll get it on our end. We will be taking your questions at the end of the presentation, so feel free to send them in at any time during the presentation. Also, we encourage you to tweet with us throughout the webinar using the hashtag localgov, and be sure to tag @transformgov. And feel free to include our panelists too. Their Twitter handles are SustainPerch and @CityOfPhoenixAZ. All right, so let's jump right in and introduce our panel. And since we are limited for time, the panelist bios have been shortened. Full bios will be included in the post-webinar highlights worksheet. So first up on the ASU team, we have Justin Stritch, and he is an assistant professor at Arizona State University and is a senior research affiliate at the Center for Organization Research and Design. His research focuses on employee motivation, public management, decision-making, and public sector performance. Stuart Brett Schneider is a foundation professor of organization design and public administration at Arizona State University School of Public Affairs. He is also director of research and a senior research associate at the school's Center for Organization Research and Design. Currently, his research focuses on how public organizations make use of information technology and the effects of those technologies on public organizations, as well as how innovation in technology and policy affect organizational performance. Lily Shea is an assistant professor of public policy at ASU School of Public Affairs, a CORD affiliate and a senior sustainability scientist at ASU's Julie Ann Wrigley Global Institute of Sustainability. Her research focuses on the emergence, evolution, and impacts of alternative governance approaches, including industry or public sector self-regulation and cap-and-trade policies across policy issue areas such as climate change, toxic chemicals, ocean and marine resources, and sustainable purchasing. And finally, we have Marina Estrella, and she is the City of Phoenix Environmental Quality Specialist working on the Sustainable Purchasing Policy and Program Update. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Engineering from Northern Arizona University. And prior to joining the city, Marina served as the Program Manager for the Arizona State Implementation Planning Program, where she oversaw the technical, rule, and planning work for state air quality plans. Now, before we welcome all of our panelists and jump into our presentations, we would like to take a quick poll to help understand who is on the call today. So here in just a moment, I will launch that poll. Please do note where you are. So the question that we have here that should be on your screen, does your city or local government have a formal sustainable or green purchasing policy? And so here, just take a moment to answer yes, no, or if you don't know, just click there as well. This will help our panelists understand just who's on the call today. So we'll give it here about another 5 seconds and we will share the results. All right. So great, a pretty nice spread. We have coming in at 39% of folks said yes. Another 30% said no, and another 30% said don't know or unsure. That's a pretty nice spread. Well, thank you for taking the poll, and now on to the main presentation.
All right, thank you, Ryan. On behalf of my team too here, I think we would all like to thank the Alliance for Innovation and the opportunity. All right, thank you, Ryan.
Justin, not a problem, Justin. Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Are we good?
Yep, you guys are golden.
Awesome. All right, thank you, Ryan. That was a really nice introduction. I'm here with Lily Shea and Dr. Brett Schneider. We're going to talk about the research project that was introduced, as well as the recommendations that we've teased out for advanced green purchasing in local governments. First, though, it's really important to recognize that this was a year-long project that incorporated a number of different people and their contributions, even though they can't be here today. In particular, Nicole Darnall led really the project faculty and the oversight and management of the postdocs and graduate research assistants that we have listed here below. So it's, while 3 of us are here today, I think it's important to recognize the scope of this really couldn't have been executed without the contributions of everyone on the team. So first, just we'd like to take a moment to recognize that cities are incubators of innovation. In particular, when it comes to promoting sustainability and the quality of life for citizens that they serve. Recently, a number of local mayors and local governments have stepped up to address greenhouse gas reduction. And so, one of the things that we think is pretty interesting about this project is the saliency of the results and the increased sort of emphasis to address environmental issues at the local level. In particular, what we're really interested in is what local governments are doing and can do with respect to green purchasing. Very broadly defined, green purchasing policies aim to reduce negative environmental impacts, right, through either greenhouse gas reduction, resource conservation, and waste reduction. Okay. This project was really motivated by 2 big questions, 2 critical questions that we sought to address. And the first one is, how do cities that adopt a green purchasing policy or a green procurement policy differ from those that don't adopt such a policy? And then second, what factors are associated with GPP implementation success? Just a little bit more about the project. This project was funded with a grant from the VCAN Rasmussen Foundation. The sample frame was constructed using 791 U.S. cities with greater populations greater than 25,000. Okay. Our sample is representative based on location, size, and income. So we have a really nice representative sample. In each city, we surveyed directors of 3 departments when they existed: Director of Environment, the Director of Finance, and the Director of Public Works. The survey instrument was specifically focused on issues related to environmental sustainability, both with respect to purchasing, but other policies that may be adopted and implemented in the city. The data collection was completed in April 2017. As far as response rates go, we have representation from 58% of the cities that were included in the sample, and we had an overall response rate of about 33.8% of the individuals. As far as GPP adoption, about 60% of respondents said that they did not have a green purchasing or green procurement policy in their city. Okay? 28% said that they in fact did, where about 12% did not know. Now at this point, what I'm going to do is turn it over to my colleague Lily Shea, who's going to talk a little bit about what we found with respect to differences between adopters and non-adopters.
Great. Hi, everyone. Again, this is Assistant Professor Lily Shea. So to begin, we asked, as Dr. Stritch had shared, we asked, do cities that adopt green purchasing policy differ from cities that do not adopt a green purchasing policy? Well, it turns out, yes, cities that adopt GPP in fact differ from the non-adopters across 5 important dimensions and categories. And so in this presentation, I'm going to go through these 5 different categories and explain to you how the cities that adopt GPP and cities that don't adopt GPP, how they differ. So to begin, first of all, the green and blue bars on this figure and all the figures in this section represent the proportion of cities with a green purchasing policy and cities without a green purchasing policy, respectively, that possess, in this particular case, complementary policies and practices. In other slides, you're seeing how these different cities differ with access to pertinent information or resources, leadership, whatnot. And for this particular slide, a key takeaway from our survey is that cities with GPP are more likely to adopt complementary policies and practices. So, for example, more than 50% to 85% of cities with a GPP have implemented a recycling policy, green building policy, energy and water conservation policies, compared to about a third or less of non-adopters. Here, as you can see, with the exception of recycling and water conservation policies. That said, however, no more than about half of non-adopters, compared to 2/3 to 85% of cities with the GPP, have in fact implemented the recycling and water conservation policies, respectively. And when it turns out, cities with a GPP are also more likely than cities without a GPP to implement a variety of socioeconomic policies, such as local business, minority-owned, women-owned, and veteran-owned business purchasing policies. In fact, 2/3 of adopters, compared to a little over a third of non-adopters, have implemented a local business purchasing policy, for example. And as you can see, over 50% of adopters have implemented minority-owned and a woman-owned business purchasing policy, compared to about 20% of cities that have without the GPP. And moving on, when it comes to complementary practices, about 50% of cities with the GPP set goals and targets for environmental performance, whereas less than 20% of cities that have not adopted GPP do so. And then, and that being said, though, All cities, regardless of whether they have adopted a green purchasing policy or not, have been fairly slow to implement practices such as tracking spending of environmental sustainability activities, conducting internal audits of environmental performance, or implementing an environmental management system. That said, cities that have adopted a green purchasing policy are more likely to engage in these complementary practices than non-adopters of green purchasing policies. An important finding from our survey is that all cities who responded have readily written contracts to reduce purchasing costs, with higher percent of cities that have adopted a GPP doing so as compared to cities without a GPP. Now, this suggests that contracting is one potential area in which green purchasing considerations could be embedded in a cost-effective manner. E-procurement systems could also be leveraged, although this is an area where more resources could be allocated to increasing efficiency in the purchasing process for adopters and non-adopters alike. We also asked department directors how they rate the importance of different characteristics of a product or service when deciding on their purchases. On balance, department directors in cities with a GPP reported that environmental and social considerations are more important to them compared to directors in cities without a green purchasing policy. And so, for example, just under half of the cities with a GPP reported that reducing greenhouse gas emissions is important or very important when compared to only 1/6 or about 15% of directors in cities without a GPP. Differences lessen, but still quite large when we're talking about importance of recyclability or reuse, environmental impacts, or packaging waste and disposal costs as characteristics of deciding factors of purchase. We also find that cities with a GPP are also more likely to consider social-oriented criteria, such as minority or women or owned businesses. Now, in considering purchasing concerns across product categories, we learned in our survey that cities that have adopted GPPs are more likely to incorporate environmental concerns across a variety of products. I mean, close to 75% of cities that have adopted a GPP considered environmental impact in purchases of chemical products to be very important, compared to about 50% of non-adopting cities. The largest difference between adopters and non-adopters are for purchases in wood and paper products and transportation-related purchases. Now, with respect to information access, the city shared with us that those who have adopted, or those that have adopted GPPs are more likely to have access to specialized lists, not only on green products and services, but also lists on minority and small businesses. About half adopters versus about 1/4 of non-adopters have access to these different types of lists. And close to a majority of adopters have access to information on environmental impacts of products, eco-labels, compared to just about 25% of non-adopters. And according to our survey, our findings suggest that while organizations often report that financial constraints prevent the adoption of sustainability-oriented policies, it appears that top-level management support has more impact, as do employee attitudes. So when it comes to leadership, for example, close to 70% of cities that have adopted a GPP reported buy-in from top management for the implementation of green purchasing initiatives. This is compared to about 48%, so less than half of cities without a GPP policy. And employees in cities that have adopted GPPs are more readily embracing green purchasing and have more financial resources for implementing GPPs. And when it comes to state and federal grants and awards, directors in cities with green purchasing policies tend to leverage these types of financial resources from external sources. And so, for example, 50% of adopters consider awards and recognition programs to be an important resource compared to less than a quarter of non-adopters. Similar patterns exist for the importance of educational programs related to environmental sustainability. In fact, 70% of cities that have adopted a GPP consider grants to be especially important compared to about 49%, so less than half of non-adopters. We find also that vendors play a key role in helping to distinguish between cities that have adopted GPPs versus cities that have not adopted green purchasing policies. If about 50% of directors in cities with GPPs tell us that many vendors offer environmentally friendly products and services, compared to just a little over a third of directors from cities that back a GPP. It's noteworthy to point out that a little greater proportion of directors in cities without GPP reported they strongly agree it is easy to switch vendors in their departments, compared to about 62% of directors with GPPs. Now, these differences may be because cities with GPPs are a little more likely to negotiate contracts to reduce their purchasing costs, as we saw earlier, then these contracts make it more difficult then to switch vendors. And these negotiated contracts tend to be pertaining to environmental considerations. Now, before moving on, it's important to note that while adopters and non-adopters are different, as I said, in many different dimensions, they also perceive their city's general administrative environment and traditional procurement criteria to be in fact similar, regardless of their, regardless of the city's capacity to adopt a green purchasing policy. And so all cities, adopters and non-adopters alike, they consider like product, price, execution of pre-existing contract agreements, tech specs, and life cycle costs to in fact to be of similar importance. And these various cities share similarities in department rules and procedures, and they in fact have similar commitment to innovation. Now, I am going to turn over the presentation to my colleague Stu Richnander, where he's going to talk about factors that are driving successful implementation of GPPs.
Thank you, Lily, and thank you all for tuning into this webinar. Before I get started, I'd like to make an observation. In the poll, you people indicated roughly 39% of you are working in settings which have a formal GP policy in place. And I find that interesting because you are in, as a group, actually a leadership group, because more of you in this audience have a policy than what we found. As you can see in this slide and was mentioned earlier, we found only about 28% of the sampled cities that responded to us actually had a policy. So with that in mind, my section here is going to focus only on those respondents who actually indicated to us that they have a policy. So we're not going to be talking about everybody. We're only going to be talking about leaders, people who've decided they have a policy and put it in place. Now, as most of you know, as practicing managers, just having a policy doesn't mean it's going to make huge changes in an organization. It takes more. And so what we asked and what we're focusing on here is the question of, well, you have a policy in place, but was it successful, at least in your minds, in moving and changing the organization to having some kind of an impact? To do that, we look only at the 170 individual responses in the cities that identified they were successful. And to do this analysis, we have to do it in a little bit different way. We, as in the other section where we looked at adopters and non-adopters, focused on organizing these factors into 5 broad categories that you see listed here, and I will cover these as we go forward. Here is our first sort of set of bar graphs. The first thing you might find shocking if you look at these is, wait a second, some of these add up to more than one. So for example, you'll see here, some of these bar graphs, 77% and 45%, add up to more than one. Well, how does this happen? So before I try to explain the substantive results, let me talk a little bit about how these statistics were generated. What we do is we look at whether or not a particular factor exists within the group of cities within the 170 that said we are successful in implementation. And we calculate the percentage of those cities that had this particular characteristic. So for example, having an environmental sustainability policy. Then we look at the group of cities that said, well, we have a policy, but it's either not successful or, you know, neutral. It didn't quite do what we hoped. And then we look there. So the green in this case are for those cities that were successful. The blue are for those cities that were either unsuccessful or neutral. And so we're looking at two different groups. Therefore, these proportions don't necessarily add up to one. They're just the proportions within those two different groups. These are called conditional frequencies because they're conditioned on the group we're looking at, successful versus non-successful. A good benchmark to keep in mind is if you look at the unconditional likelihood or frequency of success, which was 52% versus 58% versus 42%. And you'll notice here that the graphs all are greater than that. That's why we selected them. These results are essentially strong indicators within their respective groups of the presence or non-presence of these characteristics. Okay, so having said that and tried to make the complex clearer, hopefully I have, let's take a look at what we found. As we found with differences between adopters and non-adopters, complementary policies matter. Another way to say this is, for the most part, if a city had in place complementary policies like environmental sustainability policy or greenhouse gas emission policies or water conservation policies or energy conservation policies, then when they put in place a procurement policy, a green procurement policy, they were much more likely to see success in implementation than those that did not have those in place. The one exception is an interesting one worth a few comments, and that is this did not seem to be the case for the e-procurement system. In fact, it seemed to be the opposite. That is, we saw more e-procurement systems in cities that felt they had implemented but had not been successful. We believe that the main reason for that is the nature of the specific e-procurement system they put in place. That is, all e-procurement systems aren't created equal. Some e-procurement systems have in place the capacity to deal with alternative criteria such as green criteria and so forth. And we believe that if cities were locked into a e-procurement system that didn't have the capacity to support green procurement, that actually could be a drag, a barrier, or a hindrance. Other complementary practices that we find, again, once you've adopted, if they had them, are likely to lead to their view that those adopted policies for procurement would become more successful, or environmental sustainable director, environmental sustainable committees, targeting of environmental performance, and having some kind of interorganizational capacity to discuss, focus on these issues. These are all related to the actual operations and management. So unlike having a formal policy in conservation, these are really about structures and the operation of sustainability writ large in the government. Having those actually help. Next, we look at information access. With regard to information access, again, we see a number of criteria and activities in place that, again, once you've adopted, if you have these activities in place, are much more likely to lead to what the managers perceive as a successful adoption and implementation. And those are having environmental impact of the products when they're trying to make choices, having product service lists available that reflect green products, tracking of spending on environmentally sustainable activities, and having access to an online database of environmentally friendly products and services. Now, this last point's useful because, as you might imagine, that's something that should be embedded in an e-procurement system. And of course, if it's there, it clearly has a impact of leading to successful implementation. But if you're locked into an e-procurement system that doesn't, it actually is a barrier to drag. Next, issues of leadership and responsibility. And while these graphs show one of them being important and two of them not, it's really the same story here. And the story here is one we know from years and years of research and study of organizations when it comes to organizational change and adoption. To be successful, to get the adoption and to get successful implementation, it requires top leadership to be responsible. And what we see here is, again, much more likely to see success when that's the case, and much more likely not to see success when those kinds of activities are either at mid-level management or foisted further down the pyramid into staff positions. Vendors, the fourth category. Again, we see that vendors play an important role, and if you go back and take a look at what we saw in information access, this is complementing those results. Having a department's vendor offer environmentally friendly products, or vendors helping us to learn about environmentally sustainability purchasing options, ties again into information criteria we discussed earlier, e-procurement, the extent to which all of these things can be leveraged together once a policy is in place to try and get success in the implementation as you move forward. Finally, the category of innovation culture. Not surprisingly, we see when managers believe that they reward employees who develop innovative solutions, or departments have a strong commitment to innovation, or employees are not afraid of taking risks, in environments like that, those organizations were much more likely to believe that they had a successful implementation of this new innovative idea of green procurement. And again, this is consistent with what we know generally about organizational change and innovation. Finally, before I turn this back over to my colleague Justin, it is important to think about what doesn't matter. Now here, because we're focusing only on organizations that have adopted a policy, it's important to understand when we say this doesn't matter, it means it doesn't matter as either being a facilitator or as a barrier. So rules, things that sort of like red tape and procedural rules don't seem to either facilitate or act as barriers. We also see that having a wide range of traditional criteria such as price, use of contracts, having standard performance requirements and technical specifications, or adherence to life cycle costs in the purchasing decisions, don't seem, again, to either facilitate or act as barriers. Now, this is kind of interesting because one of the things you hear managers constantly saying in this area is that, well, we can't go green because we always have to pinch our pennies. We worry about price, price, price. Well, these are all organizations that worry about price, and they worry about performance requirements, but these don't seem to be either slowing down or facilitating this process. Okay, with that, let me turn this back over to my colleague Justin, who will talk a little bit about how we sort of looked at all of these things and sort of organized them into a set of what we hope are useful recommendations to practitioners.
Thank you, Stu. So we just presented, I think, a lot of information there. And what we're going to do is, as Stu mentioned, is summarize these into 8 recommendations that we think are helpful moving forward, recognizing that there's probably more that can be done, but these we think are particularly useful. So first off is to build on complementary policies and practices. Many organizations already have policies designed to promote environmental sustainability, so nesting the discussion about GPP and green procurement practices within the context of those discussions and already existing organizational goals can be helpful moving forward. Right? The utilization of information about environmentally preferred products. We have a resource here, but one of the things that's really important, right, is making information available to the individuals that are making purchasing decisions. Number 3, we have utilized e-procurement systems that integrate environmental product information. One of the things that my colleague Stu mentioned earlier is that e-procurement systems could be a barrier if they don't allow for that integration of product information. And then the 4th one we have on this slide is tracking spending related to green purchasing. Right? This is one way to sort of quantify the impact of green procurement to those that are champions of such policy. By tracking spending, it becomes embedded as an organizational priority. And then it also helps to the extent that it's necessary to demonstrate the life cycle cost and sort of putting forward an economic argument. And then finally, we have the last 4 here, is enhancing collaborative vendor relationships. One of the things that we sort of teased out of these findings is that oftentimes vendors have early information on product specifications and environmentally friendly products, things that can help promote environmental sustainability. Assign accountability to top-level management. Once again, the findings demonstrate that unless individuals are assigned responsibility for successful implementation, right, you might have really well-intentioned sort of contracting officers, but they are going to respond to the leadership, and that's important. Fostering a culture of innovation and allowing for experimentation with new products. One of the things that we found is that a lot of decisions are based on what people purchased the last time, and that's important, right? But figuring out ways to allow for and reduce risk that's associated with new product adoption. And then finally, recognizing that there are a lot of people that are really interested in this topic. There are a number of professional groups and networks that are working together to share best practices. I think this is the Alliance for Innovation is a strong example of that. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan, who I think will get it to Marina. Thank you all.
Hi, all. Perfect. So I'm going to give a little bit more background on the Sustainable Purchasing Policy and Program at the City of Phoenix. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how it all started, what we're working on right now, and kind of future policy and program updates and how we will get there. So a little bit more in the background. This is our website right now, and our policy was the Environmental Preferable Purchasing Policy. It was created in 2007, thanks to a City Council resolution. So how the program started, it started as part of the Pollution Prevention Program, and it started as, our office, which is the Office of Environmental Program, working with the different departments and making sure that we checked all the material safety data sheets to make sure that there was nothing harmful in the chemicals or any materials that we bought. So it then just continued to grow into a program, and when this policy was created, there were also other policies that complemented it. Like Lily said, the city also has a hazardous materials purchasing policy. It has a minority local business policies. So there's definitely certain policies that go hand in hand with it. So we realized about a year and a half ago that our policy and program both needed updating, because although there were purchases being done that were environmentally friendly, there weren't as many as we would like to see. So ASU was very helpful, and they completed a cord study. So their cord group came in, did a focus group with the city buyers, did some policy benchmarking, identified 5 of the barriers, and some of the things they identified was that, there was the lack of knowledge of green alternatives. There was cost effectiveness and financial incentives that probably would help. They provided 8 recommendations, which they gave an overview in their presentations, but some specific to the city of Phoenix was creating, a green purchasing team, including directors in the purchasing decisions, networking with other organizations and cities, and just creating incentives. So our policy update consists of our goal date to have it updated is December of this year, and we are transitioning to call it the Sustainable Purchasing Policy to match our sustainable goals or sustainability goals that are 2050 goals. And as part of the policy update, what we've done is we've created different attachments to go with the policy, just to make it a little bit easier for city shoppers or city buyers to find the information they're looking for. They can be looking for product specification information, or they could be looking, for specifically a life cycle analysis sheet. So we went from having a policy that was 11 pages long to 4 pages long, which talks about the responsibilities of the different departments, the responsibility of our office, the responsibility of our finance department. We also made the language, or working on making the language a little stronger. So instead of a should, we're trying to switch it to a shall, as long as it's fiscally responsible. And then we're also adding some sections to the policy. We've made sure too, as part of our policy update, that we've kept our stakeholders involved internally. So our finance director and our big department directors have been involved in reviewing it. Our law department, of course, has taken a look at it. So we're in the process of hopefully sometime in October or November taking it to a city council, getting the update approved, and moving forward. So some of the the policies, the writing, but what really makes a policy successful is the program behind it. So some of the program updates that we're working on as a city is we are working on updating our internal site so that city buyers and all city employees have access to the resources that they need, the policy, any questions that they might have on life cycle analysis and cost. We're working on updating our procurement system because as part of the policy update, we want to make sure that internally we're tracking our green purchasing and that we're seeing how successful this update has been. We're working on, so cities have a certain process, and our city has a process too, where our purchases from the very beginning, depending on what amount you're purchasing. So say it's over a certain amount, you have to have a scope of work, you have to go out and do a request for proposals, and then you have to do bids. So there's certain language that has to be incorporated in the initial scope of work to make this program successful and to make sure that what we're purchasing is, environmentally friendly. There's also the contract language that comes in hand after, we've selected a contract or we've selected a vendor, that we need to make sure we're working on making sure that there's language in there that requires our contractors to have, policies of their own that help the environment. So we've also been working on training. We think the training is key because employees just in general need to be aware of the policy and how they can help and what their roles are. So we have a pilot group of 5 of our buyers right now going through the American Purchasing Society. They offer a certification. You have to go through the purchasing professional training first, but then they have a green purchasing professional training that you can take. And, it concentrates on green purchasing. And these 5 buyers that are going through this training, we're going to be using, the knowledge that they gain to update our training materials that we have internally for the rest of the shopper and buyers in the city. Moving forward, we also would like to hopefully partner with other cities that are interested in updating their policies or, maybe working on their policies to make it a lot more successful. And of course, we're definitely working on getting management buy-in for each of the different departments, because at the city, we have buyers in not only our finance department, but there's also specific buyers in the different departments that need to be trained. So their managers need to be supportive of the policy so that it can be successful as well. On another note, there have been some success stories, so that's good. We've worked on really pushing the recycled paper, the 30% recycled paper, and that's helped because it helps because you're buying recycled paper, but you're also creating a market since the city of Phoenix does have landfills and does have a recycling facility. And then we've also recently had a success story where we replaced our carpets in one of our buildings, and the carpet vendor took the carpet that we replaced and they recycled it. And also we've seen benefits emissions-wise, since the carpet creates or allows for greenhouse gas emission reduction. So those are some things aside from just, green purchasing that you can see as a benefit of it that are environmentally friendly benefits. So with that, if anybody has any questions, you can always send me an email or give me a call so I can kind of talk more details if you're interested.
Great. Thank you, Marina, and thank you, the ASU team. That was, thank you all for sharing your work and the study. So now we've allotted time for a quick Q&A to hear what the audience has to ask. We've already gotten a few questions in, so we'll start right off and jump right into it. Pull up the first question here. All right, and so Marina, with your last presentation, so would it be possible, are there any resolutions or policies from the City of Phoenix that would be available for folks to see as an example? I mean, if I know the process is coming along, but.
Yeah, so there's the 2007 Environmental Preferable Purchasing Policy that's available online, and I can definitely send it out so that everybody has a copy. And our policy update is in draft format, and I can also send that out, but it's not adopted or official yet. But definitely, that's something that we can share.
Thank you so much. And for the ASU folks, it's along the same lines. Are there any templates or guidance tools that are available to help organizations get started tracking green procurement related expenses?
So one of in the report, we have several resources from the EPA. One of the challenges is that it's going to be kind of conditional on the process that exists for each city, right? So if a city has an e-procurement system, it may be possible for them to integrate some sort of tracking, some sort of green purchasing tracking into the existing system, right? If they do not, part of that is going to be sort of just a challenge in terms of integrating sort of the goal with respect to tracking this sort of spend with what it is that they're currently doing.
Yeah, actually, this is a really good question, because before you get started, it's probably a really good idea for the city to understand its existing, if they have an e-procurement system, what it can and can't do, or if they don't have an e-procurement system and they're thinking about implementing some kind of green procurement policy, to be looking at e-procurement systems and the extent to which they can support this. Because the easiest, most straightforward way to do this is through your e-procurement systems. We do have in the report on the recommendation actually a site from EPA that talks about e-procurement systems in this regard that can give some helpful hints.
And one final point, we do as a research initiative have a website that we can send out the link to our participants today, where on there you'll find a section on tools and tips for local governments, as well as just in general research in the area of sustainable procurement.
Got it. And then, thanks for that. It sounds like, as you guys mentioned, we're working on grabbing a link to that webpage now. And then also, so to speak to that, earlier in your analysis of the study, you all had mentioned one of the factors being vendors. Now, did you in your study note perhaps the regional conditions like neighboring jurisdictions or perhaps even benchmarking? So in other words, did you see as competition as being a factor?
So that is something that we're in the process of looking at. We collected this data in April 2017, and one of the things that we're going back and doing now is matching to other sorts of data related to what the cities are doing with respect to performance management systems. But that's something that I think is that we can look at in the future and plan to. But it's not something that we've addressed up to this point. So we're pretty satisfied with what we've managed to get out
since April.
Yeah, since April, and now we have teams of students that we help look at this as well, because I think that's an interesting sort of one of the next pieces.
That's another good reason for the people out there listening to look at our website, because we will, any new findings, we will use that website to get out to people.
Got it, and thank you for that. Yeah, you all went over so many different components that it seems like it's a great report. One other question that we have coming in, do you all have examples of, what are perhaps examples, and Marina, perhaps you can jump on this one too, examples of green purchasing that are currently or planned to help Phoenix meet its 40 by 20 goal, which is 40% waste reduction by 2020. I'm not sure if you all can speak to that yet, but I guess what's in the works there?
So as far as green purchasing, I talked a little bit about our carpets, the new carpets that we bought about a year ago. But what we are tackling as far as to make sure we meet that goal is we're creating, awareness for our residents, and we're also making, the trash pickup and the recycling pickup a lot more easier. So that's where we're starting as far as that goal. And then, the green purchasing internally in the city, it's an additional plus or an additional benefit.
Got it. Great. And then let's see, another question that we have coming in. Could you all elaborate on the role that leadership has played in the successful implementation of these green purchasing policies? I know you spoke to it to some degree as a factor in the success of these programs, but could you elaborate on that point?
Recognizing the limitations you get from survey data, because we're really just asking some questions and people are telling us, we did identify that in cities that viewed themselves as having a successful implementation, they were much more likely to have leadership at the top, meaning department and city level leadership. We also found in a similar fashion that certain kinds of, I guess the best way to think about it is, and these would have to operate at the city level, management structures that support sustainability practices. So a sustainability director, a committee of people that work across departments and so forth. So both leadership at the highest level of leadership and the kind of leadership that puts in place these management structures, at least again from our survey data, seems to be important. It's hard for us to talk about specifics, although we hope in the future to get actually out to some of these communities and do some case studies.
It's perfect. And I'm getting another, some folks have asked for a link to that, to your webpage with the report. So I am actually sending that out via the chat right now. So folks on the call, there is a direct link there to that, that spa and spree page where you can find the report that we've discussed today. Also, we will make sure to include that in the post-webinar wrap-up summary. So that way you'll have all these slides, a worksheet, as well as a link to that report. So great. In looking at the time, we're getting close to the end here. So for the ASU team or Marina, if you all had any last comments, give a minute for that, and then we will start wrapping things up.
So this is Justin Stritch from the ASU team. I think one of the things that we just would really like to do is thank the Alliance as well as all the participants for this platform. One of the things that we're doing sort of as we move through this research agenda, it's really important for us to connect with people that are practitioners working in the field. I think on our website we have an opportunity for you to submit to us what it is your city's doing, because we would like to know more about what you all find is sort of determinants for success, what's worked, what doesn't work, and one of the things that we would really like to do is continue to make sure that we have contact with this community through the Alliance, but then also through our website as well. And if you have any other questions, feel free to contact us either through the website. Our emails are available on the website as well as online. Once again, whatever we can do as researchers to help support you as you seek to implement green purchasing or procurement policies, we're here. We're here to help. Thank you.
This is Marina. I mirror Justin's statement. If you need anything to make the policy updates or policy development any more successful, feel free to contact me. There's a lot of lessons that we've learned through the process that might be helpful, and the contact information was in the presentation. So, yep, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. So we'll do some of these wrap-up slides and go from there. So real quick, I just wanted to share with everyone on the call that you can find the handout that for the presentation today in your GoToWebinar toolbox. A recording of today's session will also be sent out tomorrow through GoToWebinar. So do keep an eye out for that email. As a reminder, because you registered for today's webinar, your link to the recording and handouts is good for the next 60 days. So you can host additional viewings and discussions, meetings around this topic in your organization. Also, do check out the resources section on the Alliance website. For any reason that you don't receive that email tomorrow with a recording and post-webinar handout, feel free to reach out to me at Ryan Spillers, and my email is rspillers@transformgov.org. All right, and real quick, also be sure to save the date for some of these other upcoming learning events that are hosted by the Alliance. We've shown a couple here, including some regional workshops to help you connect and network with your peers on topics such as this. And also, just a reminder that members can contact me or your regional director at any time if you have a topic that you would like for us to explore, and or even interested in exploring a workshop in your area. And finally, we would like to thank the audience for joining us today. And of course, a big thank you to Justin, Stuart, Lily, and Marina for the great presentation and discussion. We really appreciate your participation and willingness to share the hard work that you guys do in our webinar program. Thank you for sharing that experience. For our attendees, as you exit today's webinar, you will be asked to complete a short survey. Please take just a moment to do so, as this helps the Alliance improve your future learning experience. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.